Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. No hell below us. Above us is only sky. Imagine all the people living for today.
Imagine there's no countries. It isn't hard to do. Nothing to kill or die for, and no religion too. Imagine all the people living life in peace. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. Hope someday you will join us, and the world will be as one. Oh, you may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. Hope someday you will join us, and the world will be as one. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. Hope someday you will join us, and the world will be as one. And the world will be as one.
I dream of a world where people just take care of each other and not hurt each other.
I dream of a day when our differences are no longer approached with suspicion and fear, and instead are approached with curiosity and inclusion.
I dream of a world that doesn't make me choose between being a mother and having a career.
I dream of a time where people are accepted for who they are and no one feels undervalued, underestimated, or marginalized.
Riyadaydu waa bulsho nabad ah oo barwaaqo ah.
I dream of a world where one day my daughter will make a wage just equal to that of her male counterparts.
I dream of a community where everybody within the community is empowered to be leaders.
I have a dream that every child in America has an equal education and has a chance to pursue their dream.
I have a dream for a safer society for our children and a genuine equal opportunity for minorities.
I dream of living in a world where women and minorities are rising through the ranks to become leaders amongst leaders in every aspect of our society.
I dream of a day when we no longer raise our children under a culture of fear and shame, when we can be able to accept each other as we are.
I dream of a just world where all people have full and equitable access to opportunities that enable them to lead healthy lives.
My dream is that every human life matters.
I have a dream that one day the color of my skin will not automatically label me as less than or inferior. My dream is to live in a world where we leverage our differences to benefit the lives of all.
I have a dream that each child has access to a high-quality education that feeds and nurtures their curious minds and inspire them to become lifelong learners and passionate readers.
I have a dream that one day all school children will go to school and feel safe.
My dream is to make a difference every day in someone's life, even with a smile.
I dream of a world where fear will never dictate our future.
My dream is to live in a world where we embrace cultural competency and social justice for all.
Mi sueño es que haya paz en el mundo, pero comencemos con nuestra paz interna.
The Community Relations Commission dreams of building a community for all.
So here's my dream, that our city will become an example of the beloved community that Dr. King spoke of, and that the voices of marginalized citizens in our city will be just as important and just as respected as the voices of our leaders.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, or evening, I should say. My name is Riley Boddicker O'Connor. I'm in 9th grade, and I'm 13 years old, and I go to Metro Institute of Technology. And the topic for my oration is, what would Martin Luther King say today? Chaos or community? Martin Luther King was a hopeful and positive man. He believed in our people and in our country. Even though he was killed, he left a significant mark on history. It is so large that we are still talking about it today. If Martin Luther King were still alive, he would speak publicly with his trademark enthusiasm, but he'd be disappointed at the lack of effort on some of the issues in the civil rights movement 50 years ago. Martin Luther King was against violence of any kind, even if it was with good intentions. In his famous I Have a Dream speech, he talks about police brutality in Mississippi. Now in the 21st century, police brutality is still a big issue. Martin Luther King would be disappointed at the violent policemen who have been shooting innocent black men, especially because this was a problem happening all the way back in the 1960s. But those policemen are not the only people Martin Luther King would be upset with. After the fatal shooting of Michael Brown in Ferguson, town members sought out revenge in a violent way. But this goes against everything Martin Luther King stood for. King would ask us to look for justice and not for blood. He would say that both sides of this issue are wrong because each side violently hurt innocent people, which is inexcusable in Martin Luther King's opinion. King would construct peaceful and organized protests that served a definite purpose of making a difference. We can continue in his legacy by using his protesting techniques in our own pursuit of equality. If we learned how Martin Luther King organized his successful protests and tried to follow those, I'm sure we can make a difference much more efficiently. Equality is fought for on many planes. Currently, people voice their opinions on social media. In some ways, Martin Luther King will be proud of how social media unites everyone from around the world. But as Robert Frost once said, nothing gold can stay. Social media has encouraged us to join a society of slacktivism. The term means exactly as it sounds. Because of social media, we can slack off on making a difference while still pretending to. In other words, people complain about all the things they think is wrong with the world on social media, but continue to sit back and do nothing about it. When Martin Luther King was alive, you had to actually go out and make people listen to you, and that usually wasn't an easy thing to do, especially if you're a minority like Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King traveled long distances to give speeches and organize protests that required a large amount of stamina and patience. He would be disturbed at the lack of effort demonstrated by some of today's protesters, but there are still many protesters who are willing to work hard to improve today's society. Although Martin Luther King was a devout Christian, he believed that people of all religions should live in peace and harmony. In his famous I Have a Dream speech, he talks about not only racial discrimination, but also religious discrimination. In the very last sentence of his speech, he proclaims, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, great God Almighty, we are free at last. He wished for a society where religion didn't separate us. Now, 50 years later, religious stereotypes still cause members of one religion to lash out against another in hurtful ways. For example, after the terrible crisis on 9/11 and the more recent threat of the terrorist group ISIS, some Americans believe that all Muslims are dangerous, which couldn't be farther from the truth. Because of recent terrorist attacks carried out by Muslims, a severed pig's head was thrown at a mosque just a couple months ago in Philadelphia. What Martin Luther King would want us to understand is that fighting with each other is not going to solve anything, especially when we should be focusing on taking on the real threat, ISIS. How can we be expected to take on a terrorist group like ISIS if we aren't united as Americans? Martin Luther King wished for equality in all things. He would encourage us to accept our religious differences and to not believe in the prejudice stereotypes associated with some religions. Based on the things I've talked about here today, some of you may believe that our world is going in a downward spiral. With all the bombings, shootings, suicides, and discrimination, it can be hard to stay positive. However, one of Martin Luther King's strengths as a civil rights activist was being optimistic despite the adversity he had overcome. During his time, there were still signs marked whites only, and a black teen could get lynched simply for flirting with a white woman. We have broken many of these barriers today, and King would be proud of that. But he would tell us to go farther. He would remind us of how far we've come and encourage us to continue on. Even with the stark reality that we have far to go, he would tell us that we can accomplish anything. Thank you.
Testing 1, 2. All right. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Let's try one more time. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Mariah Bayemi. I am a 9th grade student at Centennial High School, and the topic of my oration is chaos or community. You asked me today, what would Dr. King say? Chaos or community? I respond to you saying that in order to understand the question, you must first understand the history. So ask yourself, what happened when the king was alive, during the era of white resistance and overwhelming oppression? Then ask yourself what happened when he died. I can tell you that there was genocide, homicide. There were riots, lynchings, and a large outpouring of grief. People were in anguish because not only did they realize how much they had lost, but they also realized the dark period that was to follow. They realized that now, not only were their previous oppressors after them, but they had violence within their own communities. In a time where they were supposed to unite and carry on King's legacy, they fell. Without a strong and willing leader, they fell. So you asked me what Dr. King would say today, chaos or community? And my response to you is chaos. In the year 1969, just after Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, the Community Resources for Independent People was born in Los Angeles, California. The group was formed in response to the increasing harassment the Black community had to face from police officers. This group, now notoriously known as the Crips, have found themselves in rivalry with another group formulated for the same purpose of defeating oppression, the Bloods. These groups have deviated from their original purposes and are now gangs that have a long history of violence in the United States. The Crips and the Bloods sprang forward with good intention, but the gangs have been shattered because oppression got the best of them. This kind of oppression came not only from their previous oppressors, but it came from violence within their own communities. It came forth and expanded on the false pretenses that you could bring about a change even if you weren't united. Without a strong and willing leader to direct the initial purposes of these groups, they fell. So in this scenario, you ask me what Dr. King would say, and my response to you is chaos. We can't say that things have always been the best for everyone in the United States, but we have to remember how far we've come. In order not to regress, we have to evaluate where we've been and where we want to go. As a country and as a community, we have to have conversations and make decisions that will benefit ourselves and our future generations. An old proverb says, "A community doesn't plant a tree so they may enjoy the shade it provides, but so their future generations may enjoy the shade from that tree." A selfless act such as planting a tree or having a conversation can have effects that last longer than we think. My 8-year-old brother, who is wise beyond his years, read my oration and asked me why chaos is so prevalent in a world where people are working hard to create peace. I tried hard to explain to him that we are trying to undo hundreds of years of damage, but in all honesty, we don't have the mindset that we need. Why is it that in a world such as ours, we can't unite and bring about a greater good? This isn't naive kid optimism. This is a wake-up call. So wake up. And together, let's turn all the chaos into a strong community. Let's carry on King's legacy. So when the same question is asked of generations to come, they will proudly say, community. But as for now, you asked me what Dr. King would say. And my response to you is chaos. This is a wake-up call. This is our reality. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please give a big round of applause to the MLK Oratorical Contest winners, Riley Bodeker O'Connor and Mariah Obayami, and our performers, Kay Daniel and Chrissy T. Mr. Napoleon Bell.
Oh, baby, there ain't no mountain high enough, ain't no valley low enough, ain't no...
Well, they must have heard I was a dancer. Greetings and welcome. My name is Napoleon Bell, as he said. I'm the Executive Director with the City of Columbus Community Relations Commission. And I appreciate you for being here on this warm evening. Well, you know what we do. I just wanted to talk just real quickly. You know, our office is very involved with the community, as I'm sure you're aware, but we enforce the Civil Rights Code for the City of Columbus. We house the New Americans Initiative, working with the refugee and immigrant populations here in the city. We also work in police community relations and also community engagement and work in the community. So we do a lot of various items, especially this program that you see here, along with others that we are a part of, but also it is our task to carry out. So also one piece that if those of you have cell phones and what have you, I guess we are tweeting at #MLKColumbus, so please post your pics and tweets and posts, as I've been told. So please do that. Today's birthday celebration, though, is in remembrance of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King's legacy, is brought to you by a cross-section of community that comes together to deliver an experience that helps us not only reflect on our past, but also inspires us to move forward and recommit to Dr. King's vision of a beloved community. Although without partnerships and collaboration, we would not be able to make this program happen. So I would like to take a minute to thank everyone who made today's program possible. You know, our partners and volunteers, you know, we have great partners that provide guidance, space, and transportation, and our awesome volunteers, many of those who come back year after year. And thanks to the many talented artists who have shared their gifts through word or song. We also couldn't do this without our sponsors. A big thank you to you for giving of your time and treasure. It is truly appreciated. I would also like to thank my family, which two of them are here. My mother, Dorothy, my wife, Tony, and then our children who couldn't make it because they are in school, in college, Leah, Joe, Nate, and Chris, for their unyielding support during this journey of mine. Most importantly, I would like to thank God for the air in my lungs, a beating heart, and the opportunity to serve Him another day, and for that, I am grateful. Just this past Saturday, we completed our annual Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Youth Oratorical Contest. A crowd of family and friends gathered to hear their young person deliver their oration. Every year, I am excited to hear the orations and meet these incredible young people from schools from around the city, kindergarten to 12th grade. Their messages were fulfilling, yet very sobering. The theme for the event was, what would Dr. King say today, chaos or community? As they spoke of chaos, I heard the words, mass shootings, discrimination because of your religion, preventing families from seeking safety in our country. Talk of building a bigger wall to keep those people out. The fear of those people who are not from here. The bullying that we denounce in schools, yet is acceptable during reality shows and various electoral debates. The fear of police with the names Tamir Rice, Walter Scott, Michael Brown, Eric Gardner. I was saddened, but yet hopeful, because they also spoke of coming together, we can make a difference. Everyone should be treated equally. I will make a difference. Please join me. They also spoke of you, of seeing you, members of the community, as activists and leaders, doing things to unite through your example that there can be no unity without community. Hearing but yet feeling the orator's message brought about a roller coaster of emotions for myself and others. So now is the time that we join our young people in the fight. Whether it's Black Lives Matter, All Lives Matter, gay rights, immigrant rights, civil rights, and human rights. Now is the time we strengthen and recommit to step out of our house and into the pulpit, the streets, the voting booth, and even in the boardroom. Whomever and wherever you are, please, please take those steps toward justice. As Dr. King said, our lives begin to end when we become silent about things that matter. Now you can see the pictures from the oratorical contest on our Facebook page at Nat Bell and also Columbus Community Relations Commission. Today, many of you, though, participated in the symbolic march from the King Arts Complex, then crossing the Cultural Wall Bridge, which symbolizes the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama. We make the march honoring those who struggled, those who were beaten, and those who gave their lives for us to have the rights and opportunities that we have today. One of the hallmark programs of the Commission and Friends of the CRC is the annual Historic Heritage Civil Rights Tour. Every spring, we take a busload made up of students, residents, activists, and community leaders, young and seasoned. I call them our Freedom Riders. We travel to visit historic sites and institutions that immerse the Freedom Riders in significant events and locations from the civil rights movement. This year's tour is March 29th through April 2nd. We have one full bus already, although they are trying to convince me to have 2 buses. So if you wish to go on that, please call our office if you'd like to be a part of the 2016 Civil Rights Tour. I also invite each of you to visit our website to learn more about the experience of the Civil Rights Historic Heritage Tour. Please take a moment to experience it from here.
part that affected me the most was the 16th Street Baptist Church, because those girls who died were around my age. And so I was thinking how sad my family would be.
To go in and see where she died, and then to go over to the museum and see the shoes that she died in, the purse that she had, and the little Bible, it was overwhelming.
I thought it was just going to be things I already knew, what I learned in school, because it was big in my old school. But when we got here, and as soon as we got to the Freedom Center, I saw a whole bunch of things and a whole bunch of people's names that I didn't know about. And it kind of hit me like, whoa, I didn't know all this.
Seeing the wreath where MLK was shot and killed, that kind of put it all into perspective to me, because I read about it in books, I saw the pictures, but I didn't really think oh yeah, well, it wasn't that bad, or but I saw the wreath and then I thought, oh my gosh.
I knew Martin Luther King, he did the march, he had his dream speech. I know as black people, we was beaten, and we would be spit on, and everybody had sit-ins, and we did different things, and people risked their lives for us so we could actually be here today, and that's amazing.
I didn't know that racism still existed. I've had people say that to me. So there is work to be done.
Although on the surface it seems like civil rights is a conquered thing, it's really not. The mindset and the root cause of that is still in existence, and so that's something that I've taken away, is just what I can do to prevent myself and prevent others around me from experiencing those feelings, and what I can do day to day to make the world a better place.
Good evening. Welcome, and thank you for joining us in celebrating the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. My name is Adhanat Kifle. When I was 8 years old, my family came to the United States as a refugee from Eritrea, which is located in northeast of Africa. It was the work of Dr. King that helped to inspire Congress to pass the Immigration and Naturalization Act of 1965, which helped families such as mine. We are proud U.S. citizens that call Columbus home. I am honored to serve as the chair of Friends of Community Relation Commission, CRC. The task of the commission is to design and implement programs and policies to eliminate discriminations and embrace our diverse cultures. It is our mission as Friends of CRC to financially support and assist this work. Tonight's event is a perfect example of what we do. And now it is my privilege to introduce to you our visionary leader of the City of Columbus, our mayor, Mayor Andrew Ginther.
Good evening, happy King Day. It is exciting to be in this amazing historic theater on such an important day in our community. This historic Lincoln Theater, where often historically African Americans, it's the only place they could see a movie or a show, see some of the greatest musicians in our community. And so I hope the seats are comfortable. You paid for them. We collectively as a community came together. Great partnership with our county commissioners and with state legislators, then state representative now and minority leader and now Congresswoman Joyce Beatty, and the great leadership of Mayor Coleman and City Council. We helped to restore this theater that literally was falling down 10 years ago into the fantastic facility that we celebrate Dr. King tonight. It is all about being purposeful and intentional. I want to welcome some very special guests. I mentioned Congresswoman Beatty. She marched with us this evening. State Representative Herschel Craig is here. Representative Craig, would you stand up and be recognized? There he is. Thank you. Judge and Commissioner Marilyn Brown are here. Thank you very much. Our great county treasurer, Ed Leonard's here. And a dear friend of mine in leadership at the Ohio House and our next county commissioner, Kevin L. Boyce, is here. I think we are all familiar with Dr. King's declaration issued from the confines of a Birmingham jail cell that we are all interrelated and dependent on each other, tied in a single garment of destiny. Or as Dr. Angelo, America's opponent, always taught us, friends, we are more alike than we are unalike. We may be 500 miles and over 50 years removed from the time and place where Dr. King penned those immortal words, but they remain urgently and indisputably true. We are truly blessed to live in a city that is continuously striving to uphold the ideals of fairness and equality that Dr. King wanted for all Americans, regardless of skin color, ethnicity, religious beliefs, or who we choose to love. But Dr. King once said, life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you doing for others? It is that spirit of service that we celebrate today. But that should guide us every day. King Day just isn't important in January. It matters in what we do and how we lead our families and how we treat our coworkers and how we live our lives as people of faith throughout the entire year. If we want a city and want to realize our vision to become America's opportunity city, then we know that some neighborhoods are prospering and others are not. We know that some of our neighborhoods have not shared in the success story that is Columbus. And so we need to continue to focus on making sure that every family in every neighborhood, to honor Dr. King's legacy, his vision, and his teachings, every family in every neighborhood needs to share in our success story. Collectively, we as a community must work every day to strengthen our neighborhoods and lift up those in need, to serve the meek and protect the vulnerable. It is that calling to stand up for those who cannot stand on their own that drives me and all of us and fuels our commitment to make our city even better. And I want to thank you all for giving me that chance. But tonight I have the distinct honor of introducing our keynote speaker, our special guest. And I've gotten a little bit of time this evening to spend with her, and she is a dynamo. And I am so excited to welcome her back to the great city of Columbus to share some words with you tonight. Dr. Mary Frances Berry. Dr. Berry was appointed by President Carter and confirmed by the Senate as a commissioner on the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. She also served as Assistant Secretary for Education in the U.S. Department of Health, Education, and Welfare during the Carter administration. In 1993, President Bill Clinton designated her chairperson of the Civil Rights Commission. Dr. Berry was also one of the founders of the Free South Africa movement, which initiated protests at the South African embassy in the successful struggle for democracy in South Africa. So this isn't her life's work in America, but around the world. She was proudly arrested and jailed several times in the cause for freedom and bringing down apartheid. Dr. Berry is the Vice President of the American Historical Association and President of the Organization of American Historians. She has received 32 honorary doctoral degrees and numerous awards, including the NAACP's Image Award, the Rosa Parks Award of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the Ebony Magazine Black Achievement Award, the Hubert Humphrey Award of the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights, and the American Bar Association's Spirit of Excellence Award. Dr. Berry has authored multiple highly acclaimed books, some of which I saw here this evening, and I'd encourage you to pick one up. She is currently the Geraldine R. Siegel Professor of American Social Thought and Professor of History at the University of Pennsylvania. Please join me and rise to your feet and give a warm Columbus welcome to Dr. Mary Frances Berry.
Hey, good evening, good evening, good evening. That music was pretty good. It wasn't fast enough to warm me up, but it was pretty good. Yeah. I just want to know one thing from people here in Columbus. I have been, for years, trying to figure out why Ohio State University is called the Ohio State University. And everybody I ask, nobody can tell me why. But anyway, your mayor is my new best friend. Let me just say that I was inspired by the oratory of the young students and by, yes. And by all that has gone before I rise to speak to you. I know that my good and dear friend Julian Bond spoke here last year. And I don't expect to be better than Julian, but I will speak about Martin in my own way. Today, he would be 86 years old this year. And Martin Luther King has been with me all of my life, my adult life. And many of the things I have done, I have been inspired by him, and by extension, all of the time that I spent with Coretta in the years after his assassination, right up until the time she got ill and passed away in 2006. And one of the things that we always did over those years is to ask, whenever something occurred that we had to deal with, what would Martin do? That was always in our phone conversations and in our conversations about what we would do and what we would not do. What would Martin do? We miss him. I miss him on this day. I miss Coretta. It is always a time of commemoration, but of sadness for me, because what we talked about a lot was how Martin is frozen in time. We will never get to see him grow old, full of wisdom, and maybe with still a little mellowness, but some bite at 86. And we talked about when Nelson Mandela came out of jail, and I was in South Africa on the day he came out of jail. And all those years when we had looked at Nelson's photograph, and we imagined how he would look, but we didn't know. So we would ask his daughters, well, what does he look like? Because they visited him and Winnie, and they would try to tell us. But then on the day when he came out and we saw him as you have seen him, and the way he looked, we just couldn't believe it for the first time. And of course, we'll never see Martin like that. We miss Martin's marvelous pronouncements on a day like this. We miss his courage, but we are called upon to figure out how to make the change that will fulfill the hopes of those who follow the principle of nonviolence. And all those people who went to jail and who were assaulted and abused and died, many of those who were abused were children. We forget that, children, including my little brother, my youngest brother, who marched out of school one day when he was 12 years old, leading his classmates out to go down and sit in, and were arrested. And my mother looked for him all day and all night. She didn't know where he was. He was in jail. And so children, homegrown Southerners, people from the North, people from here, people from other places went down and helped during the Civil Rights Movement. But most of the people who went to jail and who died and who were the leaders of that movement were homegrown Southerners who had suffered lives of Jim Crow and abuse firsthand there. And so here we are. What he and the other people, what Martin and the other people in the Civil Rights Movement were trying to do was very simple indeed. They were trying to get our people to align reality with the goals of the great documents of our national life. And what I mean by that, the Declaration of Independence and the preamble to the Constitution. But to have those words apply to all of the people and not just some of the people, as they had done from their inception. And we have come, we know, a long way. Every year, reporters ask me on Martin's birthday, how are we doing, Dr. Berry? It's the same question every year. How's the country doing? And sometimes the same reporter that asked me last year, and the year before. And they say, well, we just say what you said last time? And I say, the glass is half full, the glass is half empty. Of course, we've come a long way toward fairness and justice and equal opportunity, and I like to name names rather than saying all of our people. For Asian Americans, Latinos, African Americans, people, the LGBTQ people, the disabled, poor people of whatever race or color in our political and economic life, for women, all of this. And we've done it despite the sharp differences of opinion that exist on major issues from time to time. There's been some hope and change. Sarah Palin, what did she say? How do you like that hopey, changey thing? There's been some hope and change, as Obama reminded us the other night in his State of the Union message, his last one. LGBT people, the right to marry exists. Health care insurance is available for millions more people, not for everybody yet, than ever before. And all kinds of people of different races are CEOs of major corporations. We have mayors in cities who have transcended race, or at least they appear to have transcended it in their behavior. All kinds of things have happened that are positive in this country. But what we've learned from the progress we've made is that voting doesn't solve, politics doesn't solve all problems. Martin Luther King, at the 1957 pilgrimage, prayer pilgrimage they called it, for voting rights, he said, just give us the vote, give us the vote. If you give us the vote, then we won't have to ask the federal government for anything. We won't have to ask anybody for anything. If we just give us the vote. Well, he learned that that was not so true, and he understood that in time, that politics by itself does not make the change we hope for. That politicians, and I'm not talking about any of them who are in this room, politicians love to have people vote for them, but they either find they won't, or they don't know how to, or they can't make the change that the voters think is being necessary. Always, guess what's at the top of an elected official's list? The first thing is getting elected, okay? And then after they get elected, what do you think is the next thing that is the top of their list? Yeah, getting reelected. And so, in fact, there are problems in trying to get done what needs to be done. And also, if you ever want to know what the prospects are of getting an elected official to do what you think you voted for them to do, look around to see who they hang with, okay? You can tell more about who they care about, whose views do they care about, who influences their decisions, who's with them at the end of the day, who are the last people they see at the office at night. See who they hang with. Now, Martin Luther King's life had a simple and very short trajectory. Very simple and very short. We talk about leadership, and one of the oratorical presentations was about leaders and being leaders. And students have often said to me, you know, we would do something if we had a leader. Now, if we just had a leader, then it would be fine. We could do something. And what they found out, this generation, and what was understood is that leaders are, people don't just, like Martin wasn't just born, came out of his mother's womb and had a little label on him saying, leader is born today. He became a leader reluctantly because he was chosen. And also what we forget is that in that church and in those meetings that they had with the boycott, if the guy who was the head of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, who organized it, had been there, he wasn't there. They might have picked him or somebody else, but they picked Martin because of who he was, and he was young, and he had they seemed to him to have leadership potential, and they selected him as leader. And there's a sense in which he said when they did that, let this cup pass from me. I'm not sure I can do this. And I like that in people who have to take on the mantle of leadership. Not thinking, oh, I can do it. Oh, yeah, give it to me. But I don't know whether I can do this or not, but I will do the best I can, and I will try. So he became a leader. He became a person with the kind of moral authority and kept it throughout the trajectory of his leadership. The other thing is that the time was short. Yes, there was suffering, and then there was progress, and then he was on the cover of Time magazine, which was really important in those days. It was more important than being on the Kardashians or something in those days. And then he got a Nobel Peace Prize. Amazing. He got it after he did stuff instead of before he got stuff, did stuff. And then, in fact, he came to the North, and then he found out that, oh boy, things were very racist and very difficult and had hard times. And then he got called names. We forget. People called him Martin Luther King. There were stories in magazines that said, what do the Negroes want now? You can sit down at lunch counter and shut up. In national magazines. All of that happened. And he agonized over what to do. He came out against the war in Vietnam. And in fact, there was a White House conference on civil rights that Lyndon Johnson had after that, and he told Martin that he wasn't invited. You think of Martin Luther King as on a high all that time. Martin Luther King was not invited. He gave that speech at Riverside in 1967 against the war in Vietnam because he thought it was immoral and because he also thought it cost a lot of money that could be spent for poor people who needed it. Yes. And when I heard that speech, I decided, I was in college, that I was going to go to Vietnam and see what was going on for myself. and found out you couldn't go unless you were a reporter, so I pretended I was a reporter, even though I wasn't, and went all over there from the top to the bottom to find out what was going on. And so we have a lot of work to do with him gone in his spirit on his agenda of peace and justice. And we have to use nonviolent protest, persistence, and courage to do it. We have headwinds against opportunity, that I call them, that seem never to reduce in strength. We are all heard about and talk about those people in Flint drinking that water that's making people sick and everything. And you think, how could we, in the richest country in the world, okay, have that happening to our people? It's called environmental racism. That's what it's called, okay? And it's existed just like every other kind of racism for a long time. But headwinds against opportunity. We've got the Michael Brown and Eric Gunn. I could call the roll. All these people who being Sandra Bland, LaQuan McDonald, everybody. Every time you look up, somebody getting shot who is unarmed. It's happening to somebody while we're in here. And we just don't know about it yet. It is also the year of the Mother Emanuel 9. I was in Charleston again recently there at the church, which is right there in town. And then we've got the people in San Bernardino killed. We got, every time you look up, it's the year of terrorism and continued racism. We have become worried about security and less inclined to hope. There's been greater progress on some issues, LGBT issues, for example, than I had thought. I thought it would take longer, but then I forgot that in almost every family, there is somebody who is gay or in the closet or something that somebody knows who's a relative. But it's just like on women, the civil rights issues for women have made more progress than on race. And that's because everybody's got a woman in their family, their mama, their sister, their somebody. But not every person has a black person in the family, or if they do, they don't acknowledge it. How's that? So that's why we got greater progress on some issues, and race is always a lagging indicator, as they call it. On immigration, we've had some positive change, though we don't have the kind of reform we need. The right to vote has become harder, not easier in many places. And the Supreme Court majority is part of the problem. And Clarence Thomas sits up there silently in assent to being part of the problem. I've known Brother Thomas since I was running on the commission, and he was in the administration, first in education at the EOC, the silent Thomas, except when he's having lunch with you and he run his mouth about everything. But anyway, some of which he shouldn't be running his mouth about. But anyway, the Supreme Court majority is part of the problem. And inequality, economic inequality, has worsened even while we're told the economy is booming again. We are told the economy is okay, 5 million unemployed, that's what they tell us. But if you read beyond the headlines, you know that millions of people are out of work, and millions of people have jobs that don't pay a living wage. And the black unemployment rate has been higher throughout these years than it was 50 years ago when LBJ announced the war on poverty and the Civil Rights Act of '64 was passed. Labor force non-participation, as they call it, that is how many people are actually in the labor force participating, for African Americans is lower than ever since records have been kept. Now, you might think about it for a minute and say, well, but we had full employment under slavery? Is that what she's talking about? No, that is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about paid employment. That's what I'm talking about. Okay. We have ever declining numbers of people voting. And we talk a lot about money in politics and Citizens United and the disenfranchisement of felons, people who serve their time. You do the crime, you serve the time, you ought to be able to vote. We talk about, yes, you can applaud that. We talk about the voter ID issue, but there's another one that I'll add to that for you to think about. I just published a book this month called $5 in a Pork Chop Sandwich. and it's voter corruption and voter buying and corruption of American democracy. And it's because an old woman told me down in Louisiana, she's 90-something years old, about since she was a girl that campaigns send people by her house and they will pick you up and haul you to the polls and tell you what numbers to vote for. They have numbers and they tell you 4, 5, 6 or whatever numbers you're supposed to vote. And that if you go in there and vote those numbers, the clerk will tell them you voted, and then they'll haul you over to the daiquiri shop. They have drive-in daiquiri shops in Louisiana. You drive through the daiquiri shop, you know, a daiquiri. And they'll buy you a pork chop sandwich and a drink, and then they give you a $5 bill and take you home for your vote. And she said, I've been doing it since I was a girl. And she said, you know what? That you might think that there's something wrong with that. I said, yeah, it's just kind of illegal. But anyway, she said, but you know, those people you vote for, they don't ever do anything for you. You call them up, tell them that the road needs fixed, they don't do nothing. But she said, at least I know I'm going to get me $5 and a pork chop sandwich. Anyway, and since that time, I found out that that's done in state and local campaigns all around the country. In Chicago, they call it walk-around money. In Baltimore, they call it walk-around money. In Philly, they call it street money that the campaigns do. And then I call it voter suppression because it's voter suppression. You don't vote your choice, you get the $5, you're poor, and that's all you get. It's voter suppression on the cheap, and it corrupts American democracy. And all it's done for is to try to increase turnout of people to vote for people that they wouldn't vote for otherwise. And so there's more to this than we think. We are under attack by ISIS. We know that. We are drawn into wars and conflicts, and our allies in the Middle East don't do their share, the Saudis, the Emirates, and everything. I found out when I was in Egypt during the elections that they had that after the Arab Spring, that nobody in Egypt and in the rest of the Middle East likes the Saudis except the Saudis. And that's because they throw their money around and try to tell everybody what to do. The bargain we made in exchange for oil, which now is so cheap that we don't need to make it anymore, is their protective shield. And so we've got this war in Syria, the refugees, in Africa, the same old story of geographic lines imposed by colonial powers and tribal conflicts and a scramble to exploit the resources. Boko Haram, ISIS, all that stuff that you see on the internet and on television, and Al-Qaeda is still out there. And so it makes us afraid. And poor Obama, I feel so sorry for him. He is trying as hard as he can not to expand boots on the ground while he's in office. That's what he's trying to do, because he promised that he would not, and that he would end wars rather than beginning them. But the pressures on him are so great. And so he tries to use planes in the air in these areas and elsewhere. And because it's not funny for the people who are killed and who are maimed and our own soldiers. And I want to tell you about that too. A few years ago, before you found out that all these people were coming home with their limbs destroyed, because now instead of getting killed, they would just be totally disabled. And we know about the wounded warriors and so on. Well, a few years ago, most of us who were in public life, people like me and Julian and other people who are in office, would get letters from people who said, we are the wounded, we are the maimed, why is it nobody ever talks about us? They were in Walter Reed Hospital in Washington. And I happened to be talking to a friend of mine who's a psychiatrist about this, and he said, I have a patient who works at Walter Reed, and he said that they're not supposed to tell the public that this is going on, because the public will be upset if they find out that all this is happening. So they're to keep quiet. That's why nobody talks about it. And then after that, a reporter at the Washington Post, someone tipped her off, wrote a story about it, investigative report, and got a Pulitzer Prize. And since then, we all know about the wounded and the maimed, the warriors. And Obama is trying, as I said, desperately, as his hair becomes grayer and grayer and grayer and grayer, to get out of office without having to send more people to die and come home maimed. Martin Luther King believed in peace as he believed in justice. And he believed in, when you challenge wrong, the main thing you have to do is obey your conscience and that you must have moral authority. That if you don't have moral authority, then in fact you don't have anything to get any kind of support for what you're doing. And since the civil rights movement, without which most of us would not be doing as well as we are, many beneficiaries of the struggle have found that backsliding is much too easy. I heard somebody say the other day that the black and poor should stop whining about Mayor Rahm Emanuel in Chicago and his devious suppression of the video so he could win re-election. And I still believe that if Karen Lewis had run against him, she would have beaten him, but she couldn't because she became ill. But Martin would like what Black Lives Matter is doing. And by the way, every city in this country has now, where anybody's got good sense, has now started having body cameras on police. That's the minimal thing you can do as a best practice. It won't solve all the problems, because once you get body cameras, then you got a problem with making them sure they turn them on, and then you got a problem with the prosecutor. There's always a problem, there's another problem. But it is best practices for places to have body cameras to at least make some inroads on this. And it is also true that police themselves are vulnerable. We've seen recently that some terrorists have started shooting police, killing them. And police, we know, come in many varieties. There are black police officers, there are Latino police officers, women, there are white police officers. In most big cities, most of them are white, though, because that's a part of the history. But police officers are our guardians. We want them to be our guardians, and we pay them, and we try to respect them. But also, we don't want police killing vulnerable people when they don't need to kill them. We just don't, And we also know that if police set a bad example of always being on the muscle and always being buffed up, and every problem has a solution by shooting somebody, that just encourages young people who are out on the street, rootless young people, to think that every conflict is solved by popping somebody one. That's what the police do, just shoot you. If you don't do something, I'll just pop you. That's what they say in Philly. I'll just pop you one. I don't know what they say around here. Martin, I think that's what Martin, if Coretta, if I asked Coretta, what would Martin say, that's what she would say he would say. He loved to afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted. He was more concerned about inequity and injustice and celebrating people who are in power. He would like it that Obama's president. It's symbolic in a way of how far we've come. But he was the kind of person who cared more about what people do and about the person farthest down than he did symbolism about those who were in power. So his elation about it would be modified by that experience. But when he afflicted the comfortable, he called it pain treatment. And when discrimination occurred, he believed in calling it by its right name. There's a new Jim Crow in the criminal justice system that Michelle Alexander has written about so brilliantly. Martin also said that unregulated capitalism is wrong because it forgets about community and being concerned with everybody's well-being. And he said that collective systems like socialism forget the individual, so that what you need is a balance, a socially conscious democracy. In other words, take the rough edges off capitalism. You don't want just raw capitalism. What you want is to reconcile a system in which you have some attention to individualism and also some attention to beloved community, creating a beloved community. Now, I don't know what Martin would say about the security crisis we face since 9/11. Until now, we've been scared enough to violate civil liberties and to advocate anything that we think might possibly keep us safe. We're far beyond that thing that Benjamin Franklin, that old racist, which he was, said when he said that those who give up essential liberty to obtain a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety, don't deserve either one. And so I think, though, that unless we do something, about inequity and the conflicts of nationalism and religion and cultural values, that our fears will only increase and our pain will get worse. I am also concerned, and I think Martin would be, about our failure to enact school reform to give a quality education to all of our children. The schools that the marginalized children who need help most attend have the major problems. We used to have something called No Child Left Behind, which I used to call Kiss My Behind. And then we got charter schools and voucher schools. In Louisiana, they don't even have any public schools. New Orleans, they're all charter schools or voucher schools. Whether they got religion or not, and taxpayers are paying for them, and all sorts of options are being proposed. And now they just passed something in Congress called Every Student Succeeds. That means we don't have to do anything because every student already succeeds. But read the fine print and check it out in 10 years. And that's because we know what to do, but we don't want to do it because we don't want to spend the money, the energy, or the time. And what we want to do is test, evaluate teachers and test, and that's supposed to solve the problem because it's cheaper than doing what is actually needed. And also, I am here to tell you that having a child go to school where they wear uniforms will not solve the problem. Sidwell Friends, which is one of the best private schools in the whole country, is where the Obama children go. It's where the Clinton child, they got one child, right, where she went. It is where, I think he got one, but I don't know how many he got. But anyway, that school, it's where Joe Biden's grandchildren, some of them go. They don't wear uniforms, and they're the best private school in the whole country. So don't let people, I know I've had some people say to me, community people, well, my child, I'm going to send them to a school where they got on a uniform. Well, a uniform is not the answer. When parents say they want to do all these things, I know what parents are trying to do. They're trying to get a better education for their children. In higher education, we have major problems because the Supreme Court keeps trying to keep us from doing anything about race and race problems and the black people going to higher education, public higher education institutions that are the best ones in the states where they are, where we pay taxes. And the other day, old Justice Scalia and the Supreme Court, they talk about how we don't need to go to those schools. We need to go back to the schools we used to go to when we were segregated. Because, they're not sure we can do the work at all these schools. I don't know, it might as well be the Dred Scott case all over again in 1857. I think that what we have to do is remember that Martin was a race man. Yes, he was, but he was also a poverty man and a justice man and a class man and a humanitarian. He was a guy who believed in justice for all of God's children. And he wanted to, in that great speech that he made at the March on Washington, the part not about the dream. I understand the dream part. And the dream part is too easy because for some people, if you dream about something, as long as you don't do anything, that's fine. Just keep on dreaming. And you're not dangerous, and they don't have to worry about you because you're dreaming, and pretty soon you might go to sleep, But what Martin wanted to be the heart of that speech, and he gave that sermon many times, was that he wanted to cash a check, that we came to Washington because we wanted to cash a check to give us what? Freedom and justice on demand, and that we'd been told that the Bank of Justice was bankrupt. And we had a promissory note, and we were told the check was given back to us marked insufficient funds. So he said he didn't believe the Bank of Justice was bankrupt. And that was why we were there. And remember also that he died trying to change the economic situation of the sanitation workers in Memphis. He went from obscurity to being permanently ensconced as an icon in the halls of history, dealing with economic justice. And the Poor People's March, which he would have led had he not been killed, was the symbol of that emphasis across racial lines on the issues of poor people and poverty and justice, economic justice. He exulted at times, and he suffered along with everyone else. He, in fact, was vulnerable. He believed he was deeply religious, but he was also funny. He had jokes. Martin loved jokes. Some people think he was this somber guy who went around all the time, No, he loved to tell jokes. He loved them, and he had great ones. And when we were in the Free South Africa movement and we would be locked up someplace where they were trying to freeze us out at night, colder than in here, and we would be sitting there, and we would tell each other all of Martin's favorite jokes and laugh all night long about his jokes. But he worked hard all the time, and he knew the reality of sacrifice and understood it and was willing to make it. And he literally worked himself almost to death. I have a candid picture of him that was taken by a protester in Birmingham, and it's never been published anywhere, who gave it to me. And he's in his characteristic pose, lying on a bed in a motel room after another day of marching, protesting, cajoling, speaking, and he is talking endlessly on the phone with people all around him, asking him this and asking him that, with a look of total exhaustion on his face. So we have work to do to continue the struggle, and remember that the squeaky wheel gets the oil. And for those of you who are already working, or should you be inspired to do so, if you ever despair because you think nothing much is happening, remember that if Rosa Parks had taken a poll before she sat down the bus, she'd still be standing up, wouldn't she? She didn't take a poll. She did what she thought was right. And remember something else, that the struggle for justice is never a straight line. We move forward and then backward, but we don't ever go all the way back. Just remember that. And also that someone has to go through the fire this time. People went through the fire before, okay? Somebody has to go through the fire each time, and that each generation must make its own dent in the wall of injustice. It's up to every generation to do something. That's why I love the kids in the Million Hoodies and Black Lives Matter and all the rest of them, and I go down to speak to them whenever I can. We want safety and security, but let's not abandon our values. Don't push your voice of conscience off easily when it comes to you. Also, help to prove that the immoral people don't have to inherit the earth or the fullness thereof. Continue his work of healing our democracy and the soul of America. And I want to do one thing here. I want to ask everybody here to do something in the cause of justice each day for the rest of your life. I don't ask for large measures. I'm not asking you to go to jail or anything like that, or sit in some place or whatever, but just do something. I have learned to be satisfied with incremental change so long as it's change. It can be very small. If you believe in prayer, say a prayer for our nation. Do whatever you can. But the most important thing is don't tell anybody what you did, because you're not doing it so you can tell somebody what you did. You are doing it for your country's sake and for your soul's sake, for yourself, okay? Whenever I despair, whenever I say Trump, Cruz, all these people, Trump, it makes me so mad, Whenever I despair about anything, my mother would always say, God is my president and the Speaker of my house. God is my president. But then I would say, Mama, but the Lord helps those who help themselves. And so we have to help ourselves. Martin ended the 57 prayer pilgrimage speech with, he said, never despair, never give up, never forget the cause of righteousness, and never believe that the cause of justice is doomed. And even at the end, when he was at Mason Temple Church of God in Christ headquarters in Memphis on April 3rd, 1968, after he talked about all the threats and he rallied the garbage workers and the preachers and everyone, and he told them all about what he thought about what was happening around him. And remember what he said? I mean, I get that with you, but we would get there. He believed it, and that he'd gone to the mountaintop and he'd seen the promised land, and he wanted to know that we as a people would get there. So we should do our share to get there in our time. to hasten the day when everyone, regardless of race, class, ethnicity, religion, gender identity, sexual orientation, age, or however disabled, will enjoy freedom and equality. And only in this way will we honor his legacy and make Martin Luther King's goal of liberty and justice for all a reality. Thank you very much.
You know, you've got to give it up for her one more time, please. A round of applause for Dr. Mary Frances Berry. Well, we've come to the end of our program, but we hope from this that you are inspired, but not just inspired, but inspired to act. To act. She said it so eloquently. We just cannot sit on the sidelines. We've got to act, get involved, and get engaged. Again, thank you for your time. Thank you for being here. On behalf of the Community Relations Commission, have a great evening.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us for the City of Columbus's Martin Luther King Day celebration. Have a safe evening, and we hope to see you next year.